Okay, so just to give a bit of an overview of what we'll be talking about today. So we'll first be looking at a bit of a recap about what Powershaper Flex is and what demand-side response is itself. You might be familiar with this, or you might be quite new to this project and this concept. So we'll just have a short recap. And then we'll be handing over to Matt Franklin, who'll be talking about a demand-side response event. So what happens before, during, and after a demand-side response event with Powershaper Flex. And then we'll have a quick summary of what's been discussed and some sort of key points as we run up to the first DSR event, which will be happening in October. And then there'll be some time at the end for general Q&A, but do feel free to put some questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll either have a look at those in the chat or we'll answer those questions at the end. If you have something that's really relevant to one of the slides, feel free to put your hand up as well, or just save your question to the end and we'll go through it then. Okay, so first of all, I just wanted to hear from you. So we've got something called Slido, which you might be familiar of. So basically what this is, it's a way of taking like a live poll. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a link in the chat. And if you just follow this link, this will take you to a live poll, which asks you a bit about your familiarity with demand-side response. So yeah, here's the question. So before hearing about Powershaper Flex, were you aware of demand-side response? So all of the answers here are completely anonymous, so there's no right or wrong answer. We're just quite interested to know what your experiences are, if you've come across this term before. Great. Okay, cool. So we've got a bit of a mixture here. So the majority have kind of heard about it before, got a good understanding. Some people who never heard of it before, and a few in between as well. So that's great. Thank you so much for taking part of that. It's really good to know your kind of understanding of demand-side response. Okay, great. Thank you. And then just one more, we're quite interested to know what made you want to take part or get involved in Powershaper Flex. So if you've had your HEMS box installed already, maybe you've participated in previous projects. Out of these options, what would you say is what the sort of main reason? You know, there might be additional reasons here, but it'd be interesting to know if you have a key reason here. So it should be via the same link. So I'll just give you a minute to take a look at those questions. Okay. Brilliant. So to do my bit for the planet and to create a cooperative smart grid, I've come out on top there. And then also understanding my home energy use. Yeah, that's a really key thing that you can do with the HEMS. So that is that's really interesting. Find out more about grid flexibility, reduce waste, save money on energy bills. Fabulous. Okay, thank you so much for that. So we'll take a bit of a recap now. So what is Powershaper Flex and why do we need it? So Powershaper, it's looking at how our electricity system and use of electricity is transforming. So as we get towards more renewables being injected into the grid from renewable sources of electricity, be that wind or solar, this is obviously the direction of travel we want to go in. So we're getting away from our reliance on fossil fuels. But naturally, this means a less constant supply. Sometimes it's not been a windy day, it's not been a sunny day. So that coupled with the fact that we're also moving away from fossil fuels in vehicles and home heating. This is also increasing the demand for electricity. So what this means is additional risk on the network. So whether that supply is going to meet the demand is something that we need to consider, and it's something that we can address with how we use electricity going forward. So this brings us to the concept of demand-side response. How do we, as people that consume electricity, how do we change the way we use electricity and when to respond to these peaks and troughs in electricity supply? And how do we identify how we can really support that good operation of the grid? So this is a really key thing for as we move to a green grid. And a really good description of what demand-side response is, explicit demand-side response, is from the National Grid website here, because this can help soften the peaks in demand and fill in the troughs, especially at times when power is more abundant, affordable and clean. And it's quite a good graph on the right hand side here, because this can show how we can kind of shift those demand loads throughout the day in response to perhaps there'll be an event on TV that everybody will be watching at a certain time. So how can we, as part of this more agile electricity system, reduce that demand? And the real thing here is that we're looking at how we can become a community working together to enable this transition to more green technologies and more green electricity production. And the way that we're doing this as part of Powershaper Flex is by the development of what's in the centre here. This is the HEMS, the Home Energy Management System. And you might also see this referred to as the coffee box, the Community Flexibility Box. So the HEMS, this is installed in your home and it's connected to certain smart devices. So it can bring in solar panel data, and it can also connect with controllable loads such as immersion heaters, EVs, and some battery storage. So it's worth noting that we're trying to make this as open as possible, this system, to connect with as many different brands and models as we can. Some we just can't work with, whether that's because it's quite a locked down system and not connectable, but ultimately our goal is to try and make this as open as possible. Sorry, my cat's just in the video here. So one final thing to note as well is that when we think about how can we reduce carbon emissions on the grid, it can feel quite daunting, especially as an individual in your own home, in a rented accommodation or in a community building. How do I really make an impact? And it's a really fair question. But the key thing with things like Powershaper Flex is we are trying to generate a community. So you're not alone in this. You are part of a wider group of people contributing flexibility to the grid. So just move my cat because it's dinner time. So what I'll do now is I think I'll be handing over to Matt to talk about what actually happens in a demand-side response event with Powershaper Flex.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Yeah, so I mean that was a really good sort of introduction to the sort of general context for demand-side response and sort of the background to the sort of project. And I guess what I want to talk a bit more about is what the sort of system will look like on our end and people's experience of it and how you'll sort of interact with this. So you have the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is sort of the diagram kind of where everything fits in all together, really. And sort of we're that sort of server tower sort of in the middle, and this is sort of what is sort of linked to the HEMS, which is in your home, and the HEMS itself is linked to sort of immersion heaters, EV chargers, and sort of solar panels and batteries at the moment, which you can sort of all see below. So, and above us, in sort of theory, because at the moment this is a trial, but in the future this is something we hope to have a sort of a real sort of service. Sort of the distribution network operator sort of sits above us and will be sort of responding to their sort of requests for flexibility be that sort of an upturn or sort of a downturn. And for people who aren't aware, sort of the distribution network operator is the company that owns and operates the power lines, the infrastructure that connects like your property, your house, to the grid network. So these are sort of sit above or sort of separate to your energy supplier. So they have sort of slightly differing interests that can sometimes potentially conflict with times that the supplier might be making cheaper energy, for example, with sort of time of use tariffs that you might be familiar with. They might have different times despite the energy supplier sort of having a cheaper time of use where sort of they want people to use more energy. The DNO might in that time period want people to use less energy. And I mean, in general, it doesn't sort of tend to work out that way all the time, but it's definitely like a possibility. And I think it's something to be aware of, that our sort of position in this is in relation to the DNO rather than the energy supplier. So next slide, please, Alex. So I know everyone sort of had the sort of HEMS box installed for you, and we tried to make it as sort of straightforward as possible with that install process, but there obviously was some disruption, and we just wanted to get an idea of how sort of happy or how people experience that installation. And that would be the part where, not the part where the electrician might have come to your house, but the part where I might have come to your house, or Matt Fawcett, or someone else from the organization. So there's the link to the Slido is in the chat again, if you're able to see that. Just looks like it might be open now. One thing in the future, sort of with sort of HEMS installs, if we were looking basically at ways that we can sort of make it simpler and generally like a more straightforward sort of process. And there are some technical sort of elements to it at the moment that we hope to sort of iron out as the sort of project is developed. Cool. How's that, Alex? Do we have the numbers? Cool. So yeah, it's good. It's good to hear that most people found it not very disruptive at all. I mean, I think like yeah, as I say, it's something that we've been learning as we sort of go along. I know this is based on a number of previous projects where it hasn't sort of been quite as smooth. So we're quite happy that it's sort of panning out that way. Cool. So yeah, so what's going to happen before a Powershaper event takes place? And I mean, in this sense, I'm talking about the sort of ideal, well, where this is not a trial, but also being aware that we're working with sort of modeled and sort of simulated data about when these trials are taking place. So the first step is the DNO will request for a reduction or increase in the power use in a given time period and location. So this might be sort of a smaller sort of a single postcode, or it might be a few streets or an area. I mean, it really can vary quite a lot in size and location, and it might be in different places across, I mean, primarily the Northwest that we're working in. During this trial, we're going to be sort of applying it to sort of all participants in the trial, irrespective of sort of location, but it'll be based on the times and durations that are the DNO has provided us with some modeled data that they expect sort of future flexibility events to be taking place on. So we would then bid competing with other suppliers of flexibility in order to basically provide this flexibility that they've asked for as cheaply as possible in this area. And if we sort of win the bid, we'd be expected to sort of provide that flexibility with our services that we sort of have access to. So the next step is, once we've agreed that like we as Carbon Co-op want to provide this flexibility during this time period, is that you, the participants, will receive notification that of what's going to happen and when it will take place. So this will be like it will tell you we're going to have a sort of turn on event or a turn off event during this time period on this day. and you'll be let know via email or text message, and you'll have an opportunity to opt out there. And the text message or email will tell you how you can opt out, and you'll also be able to opt out on the Flex user interface, like web dashboard, which I'll share the link to it in a couple of slides time, but some of you might have already seen. So basically it goes from the DNO to us. You get the opportunity to opt out, and then the next step will be the actual event itself. So next slide, please, Alex. Yep. So just a quick screenshot of what the notification sort of settings looks like at the moment. So you can sort of choose to receive email or text. As I said, you can turn them off. If you turn them off, both of them, you won't receive a notification of the event, but you still will be potentially participating. So unless you go to the flexibility dashboard, you won't sort of see that opportunity to opt out. So I wouldn't advise turning these both off unless you're 100% sure you don't really want any notification of this at all, but just to let you know that that's sort of what would happen there. Next slide, please. Thanks. So here's the dashboard, what it looks like, which will have the upcoming events, and it might have, at the moment, it has sort of one test event, and in the future it might have a list of events, and you can decide to opt out of a specific event if the time doesn't work for you, if you really need to sort of either be using or not using your smart energy appliance during that time period. Next slide, please, Alex. So yeah, so what happens then? You've decided not to opt out of our event, hopefully, and we'll send a signal from our server, which is also in the standard we used called a virtual top node, and it will send it to the HEMS, which will link to any connected devices for the purposes of this trial. That's some people's immersions, some people's EV chargers, some people's battery storage. And I mean, it might be a combination of all three of those, or an individual one, or none at all. And I mean, in the future, we could imagine people would have more of a choice in what they're able to connect, and potentially, if they have other significant energy loads, they could connect those as well. During the event, the device will either turn off, turn on, maybe turn up a bit. In the case of some electric vehicle chargers, they have the ability to modulate the energy use, and it will sort of respond as we sort of want it to during that event, unless you've opted out. And this will usually last around half an hour. I mean, the exact length and duration might vary, but for the purposes of this trial, we'll be in particular looking at sort of events around half an hour. And in based on sort of DNO data, we wouldn't expect like hugely long events outside of that anyway. But it's obviously a bit more variable when you're responding to real world sort of things. Anyway, so after the event's over, like a sort of signal sort of comes, and in theory your device sort of goes back to normal. And I mean, we wouldn't see any problems here, but obviously if you have any sort of issues, this is the sort of, you notice anything funny going on, this is part of a trial, and we definitely would encourage you to get in contact. If something you didn't expect to happen happens, do let us know. We will try and look into that, and that's so definitely part of this trial, although hopefully it won't be an issue. Then using sort of data from your smart meter, which hopefully you have, it works and you've connected it to our system. If not, we have some information about how you can connect it. And if you have a smart meter that at the moment isn't working, or have tried already, then hopefully at some point it will come online. We've seen that many of these smart meters are sort of starting to come on. So using that smart meter data, or data from current clamps that some of you might have installed as part of this project, we can sort of calculate the flexibility generated. And this is sort of based on like a baseline of energy use versus sort of the actual energy use. And you'll see what this sort of generated flexibility looks like on our dashboard, on the Flex dashboard, which that's the link to that, and that's where you can also find your communications preferences that I talked about a bit earlier. So, this at this point, the sort of the data is being fed back through the Carbon Co-op Flex server, and then to the DNO to sort of demonstrate that we've had that impact that we wanted, hopefully. So this is the graph that you might see afterwards. And in this case, you can see the baseline data is typically they would be using sort of more energy during this time, and they're using very marginally less, it looks like. So there's a total event flex, which is the aggregate of everyone participating, and the individual flex that you can sort of see here. In terms of thing, it's not the sort of, in some ways I do, it's not the clearest graph, but it's not that easier thing to represent basically this generated flexibility. So hopefully this is sort of a clear thing to you, where the baseline data would typically go up in that time period. In reality, it's gone marginally down, and for some of you it might go down quite a lot, and for some of you it might even go up, but the aggregate is the sort of thing that we're looking at here. So that's the key points sort of from me on this. I don't know if you want to step in, Claire.
Thanks very much, Matt. It's a really nice overview of the DSR event process there. Thanks, Anthony, for raising that. So we have created a schedule of potential DSR event times, and the first one will be Wednesday, 19th of October at 11 AM. But we've not scheduled it just yet. So we will be scheduling that closer to the time, and based on your preferences on your dashboard, you'll get an email or a text or both. But one key thing to ask is if your email address has changed, if your phone number has changed, if you just drop us an email at powershaper@carbon.coop so we can update your details. What we'll have on file will be whatever you signed up for Powershaper Flex with. So if you've changed your phone number since there, just do let us know. Just on the next slide, second point is, if you have a smart meter, with Powershaper Flex being a participant in Powershaper Flex, you are able to have free sign up to Powershaper Monitor, and you can connect your smart meter via the link that I'll share in the chat right now. So I think most people have connect to their smart meter. Some smart meters we unfortunately just can't seem to connect with. They seem to be persistent issues with some models of smart meter. However, if you've not connected it yet, then you can do so for free using that link. And as Matt showed in that graph, this is how we can construct that baseline usage. So it shows a particular time of day. It would be able to feed into that graph to say at a certain time of day, either an individual or the entire community of Powershaper Flex participants use this amount of electricity as standard. After participating in this Flex event, this changed to a different level, either below or above the baseline. Hopefully below the baseline if it's a turn down event. So yes, if you follow that link, then you should be able to put in your IHD number and connect to Powershaper Monitor. If you can't, then it's not too much of a problem, because we can use telemetry data from Shelly devices and other things, other smart devices that may already be connected to the HEMS. So if you haven't received an IHD, Peter, then you can maybe get in touch with Matt and see if there's another way we can work around that. So just to recap as well, so Powershaper Flex events, with the DSR events, we are controlling immersion heaters, EV chargers, so certain models, EMON EVSE, Zappies and wall boxes. So we're trying to kind of expand on the different devices that we can control so far. And we are controlling some models of battery storage. So that's at the moment a Victron and a Sonnen. But again, we're always trying to make this as open as we can. So these are what are participating in the DSR events, and that will depend on what has been connected with your HEMS. And we'll also just say what we're not controlling. So don't worry that we'll sort of automatically be switching off things like ovens, lights, washing machines, tumble dryers, fridges, TVs. So we're not controlling those. With the HEMS, you can potentially do smart things with your devices in your home if they're sort of smart and controllable devices, but we are not controlling those as part of the DSR events. So how are we making this schedule for DSR events? So I just wanted to quickly touch on, because there's been a few comments in the chat as well in terms of sort of how realistic are these events going to be, because yes, they are simulations and we are sort of testing this at the moment, but we're trying to make these as close to reality as possible. So we've been working with DNOs, Electricity Northwest in particular, and they've kindly shared with us their sort of modelling of where they will require flexibility in certain areas over the next couple of years. So we're able to kind of model these peak times where they need this amount of flexibility on the grid. So it tells us how much flexibility is required, and they are also focusing on various different locations as well. It's kind of quite highly localized. So for this trial, we'll be one group, we'll be one team essentially, but going forward, we will be quite interested in how do we kind of focus on these localized pockets of flexibility provision. We will need to test these events at times when there is usage. So it might be that you've already got your car charging at maybe 3 a.m. when the tariff is cheaper or something like that. So we will be creating this schedule of demand side response events to be quite broad. So we want to try and test lots of different use cases with this. So there might be peak times, you sort of 5, 6 p.m.s, there might be middle of the days, and there might be 3 a.m.s. So it is just worth noting that a DSR event might happen when you would normally want to charge your EV, for example. So just a few things to note here. DSR events will be short. They'll be between 30 and 60 minutes. And the reason you're being given some vouchers for being part of this trial is to say thank you and to compensate you for this inconvenience, that the fact that you might not be able to have taken advantage of a cheaper tariff at a certain time. So you'll be receiving vouchers totaling £300 for your involvement in the trial. And if you've had your installation already, then you should have had your first £50 voucher, or you'll be getting that soon if you've not had your installation completed yet. The next instalment of vouchers will be £150, which will come after participation in DSR events, and then there'll be a further 100 at the end of the project. Oh yes, and I forgot I had a slide showing that. So yeah, this will show that just those phases of vouchers. So £50, 150, 300, so that will total the £300 vouchers. Yeah, and so finally, just to note that we'll be holding these kind of webinars every third Wednesday of each month, 5 till 6 p.m. On the 19th of October, which is the day of the DSR event too. So we can recap and we can talk about how it went, we can talk about any issues. So yes, there will be themes for these webinars going forward as well. So as you start to use the HEMS a bit more, we'll also have some sort of functionality focused webinars which show you how to maximize your use of the system. Okay, so I hope that was all clear. So what I can do now is I can stop the recording if that makes it a bit bit easier for people to, if you wanted to speak, and let us know if you've got any questions about what we've chatted about today. So I'll just stop the recording now.